Basically, I think you're probably going to run into a limitation with your imagination before you do with the actual functionality of the tool. So possibilities are endless.
Hey everybody, before we start the show, I want to make a couple disclaimers. This show does cover a wide variety of topics related to mental health and life in general, and some of those could be sensitive for you. I want to simultaneously encourage you to be brave in consuming difficult content, but also respect and recognize your limitations. So please use your best judgment. I will never be offended if you need to skip a question or an episode entirely, but feel free to feel it out, check out the episode, and just see what happens. If you need to skip, that's okay, but feel free to give it a shot first. I also need to say that while I am a psychologist, I'm not your psychologist, and I'm not your therapist. This is not intended to be direct medical advice, and you should not use this as a substitute for professional help. So with those said, let's go ahead and get into the show.
All right. Hello, friends of all varieties. This is the Hardcore Self-Help Podcast, episode 348. I'm your host, Dr. Robert Duff, aka Duff the Psych. I make mental health content for real people, just like you. And today we are not doing a question and answer, though if you would like to send a question in for a future episode of the show, please send me an email to duffthepsych@gmail.com or head over to duffthepsych.com. That's the website, and that's now up again, so you can use the contact form there. But today I'm going to do a bit of a kind of deep dive, specific topic kind of dealy. If you've been following me on social media or know me in real life, it should be no surprise that this episode was on its way. But today I'm going to be talking about AI. I've been going deep into the use of AI programs, like the large language model programs. And honestly, they are a big part of my life now. So, this is kind of about how AI has changed the way that I do things. And I also want to share some things for you. They're a fundamental part of how I work now. I use them every single day. And I also feel like they're kind of changing the way that I think in general. So in this episode, I want to share with you the ways in which I personally use AI programs and suggest some ways that I think they could support you in your life and specifically with mental health. So what am I even talking about? If you're not familiar, I'm using two primary tools. They're both free. One is ChatGPT. That's the one that's been out, people have been talking about it on the news, and it's everywhere. So it's, no surprise that I'm talking about it here. Everybody's talking about it. So ChatGPT, that's the one by OpenAI. And you can find that by going to chat.openai.com. It's free, though you can pay for a $20 a month version, which gives you a faster model and also priority access if it's busy, and then you get early access to the newer stuff. So there's like a new model that you can use in terms of it has stronger reasoning and stuff like that. So, but the free version is totally great. And then the other one that I tend to use is by Google. It's called Bard, and that's just at bard.google.com. And to explain what that even means, I'm going to go ahead and ask ChatGPT. So I'm going to pull it up here and ask it to explain. So I'm going to say, how would you explain ChatGPT to someone who has no idea what it is? Sure, I'd be happy to explain what ChatGPT is. ChatGPT is an AI-powered conversational agent, which means it's a computer program that's designed to communicate with people in a way that's similar to how we talk to each other. It's based on the GPT 3.5 architecture, which is a deep learning model that's been trained on a massive amount of text data, including books, articles, and websites. Because ChatGPT has been trained on such a large and diverse data set, it's able to understand and generate human-like responses to a wide range of questions and topics. For example, you could ask ChatGPT a question about history, science, or even just chat about your day, and it would be able to respond in a natural and conversational way. ChatGPT is constantly learning and improving based on interactions it has with people, so the more people that use it, the better it becomes at understanding and responding to different types of requests and questions. So that's kind of what it is. It's basically like a chat box, and you type in, in your chat box, and you send it off, and then you get a quick response back. And depending on what you input, you can get all sorts of stuff back. And I might, use ChatGPT as I'm going along here to help me out occasionally. But that is how they explain it, and I think that makes a good amount of sense. I mentioned two of them, right? So ChatGPT and Google Bard. Their functionality is quite similar, but There are a couple differences. Bard is, in my experience, at least for now, they're all growing, but right now it's not quite as strong as ChatGPT in terms of, its reasoning and functionality. But one huge difference is that Bard is connected to the internet. And so it's connected to the internet in real time, and it can provide you with local results and current information, which I think is very powerful, right? So you can say, what's going on in the news right now? You could say, what context do I need to understand the events happening over in Africa right now? You could say, I'm looking for a hotel in, I don't know, Aspen, and I'm wondering what time of year in 2023 is going to be the best rates, things like that. And Bard is going to be able to connect you to those sorts of real-time results. ChatGPT is stronger overall from what I could tell, but it's based on a static data set that they trained it with, though that's constantly being updated, but, depending on which model you're using. So before I dive into, how I've been using it, a couple things to keep in mind when using ChatGPT, because that's what I'm going to primarily talk about here. One, the more information you give it, the better. So the more stuff you put in, the more you're going to be able to get out of it. And as you continue talking with it and clarifying, it's going to get better and better, which is leading me to point number 2. If you don't get a result that you like, let it know and ask it to try another way. So, for example, if I go back and I had that explanation that I give about what ChatGPT is, say, okay, but can you simplify it even further? Certainly, ChatGPT is a computer program that can chat with people in a way that sounds like a real conversation. It knows a lot of things because it's read a lot of books and websites, and it keeps getting better the more people talk to it. You can ask it anything you want, and it will try to give you a good answer. Right, so you could do that, or I could say, okay, now how about an explanation for someone that already has a strong working knowledge of AI? And then in this one, one of the things, like, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it talks about, what sets ChatGPT apart is its ability to generate coherent and contextually relevant responses in real time using pre-existing knowledge and on-the-fly learning with new interactions, right? So you can ask it to iterate and to adjust things that you're already getting back from it, right? So unlike, Google, where you type in something and you get a result back, and you search through that, you can sort of continue to clarify and work on it sort of in a collaborative way together. One of the awesome things is that it keeps track of all the information within a given session. So I started a new chat for this episode. So anything that I type in there, it already knows everything we've already talked about in the episode, right? So, like, for instance, if I go in there and I say, all of this is for a podcast episode, what might you call that episode? And then it gave me 5 different titles. So ChatGPT, the AI conversation partner that keeps learning. Or Inside the Mind of ChatGPT, how deep learning is revolutionizing conversations. Obviously, I've only asked it like 3 questions, so it's just kind of pulling stuff out of its ass. But the point is, it keeps track of what you're talking about within a given session, and it holds on to those sessions. So you can go to the side, and it has all the things that you've done previously. So I could go back to other things that I've done and continue in that, right? So for instance, if I was doing some research, which I will talk about later, I can go back to that chat in which I was asking for research and then continue to ask follow-up questions, even if it's on another day. It does not maintain a memory between different sessions, though. So if I started a new chat, it wouldn't know what I was talking about with it in this other chat. But very powerful tool for that reason. Bard is different. It clears every time you close it. So you can see what your history was, but you can't go back to it and resume a chat. And then the other thing that's interesting about it is you can direct it to act a certain way. You can say, I want you to pretend to be a network administrator. I want you to pretend to be my boss. I want you to pretend to be a supportive friend, whatever. You can give it a name. Sometimes when I'm feeling spicy, I'll say, okay, I'm going to call you Jarvis. You call me sir. And it's like, certainly, sir. Like whatever. You can make it be what you want it to be. So all of that said, how have I been using it? How am I using chat programs like ChatGPT to really change things? One is I use it for research assistance. So I'm currently writing my next book, which is going to be about bipolar. And also I'm constantly working on outlines for the podcast like we're doing right now. One of the things that I want to be sure to do is integrate actual clinical research. So like on the podcast, I don't always provide citations or really, really specific statistics, but I'm often looking into the literature to make sure that I'm not just talking out of my ass when I give you that information. So if I say that something is supported or it's, effective or something like that, usually I'm making sure that there is data to back that up, even if I'm not kind of explicitly stating that on the podcast. And then, of course, for my book, it's a really, really valuable tool for aiding me in research. So, for instance, things that I've asked it. I've been writing, and I usually have this up next to me while I'm writing in my Word document. And I've asked it questions like, what are the primary medications that are used as mood stabilizers? And it will give me a whole list of those. Or one of the cool things is you could have it generate different types of output. So I've said, generate a table of the most common postpartum mental health difficulties with symptoms and prevalence rates. That's a literal thing that I did during my last writing session, and it popped out a table with all of that information in it, which is crazy because it takes like all of 2 seconds to pop out, which is very, very fast. And then you can also use it to ask specific questions. So for instance, let me, I haven't actually looked this one up, but let me type in, is there any evidence to suggest that people with PTSD have physiological changes in their brains? Yes, there's evidence to suggest that people with PTSD have physiological changes in their brains. Research has shown that individuals with PTSD often have structural and functional alterations in several regions of the brain, including the amygdala, hippocampus, prefrontal cortex, and anterior cingulate cortex. With my own knowledge, I know that all of those are true. So it talks about stuff that is real. And that's amazing, right? So if you didn't know and you just wanted to check, it's a great source for doing that. Now, the best part is you don't have to take its word for things, right? So let's say that I wasn't already familiar with the research that it's talking about. I could say, what research indicates that the amygdala changes with PTSD? And then it says there's a significant body of research, and it goes through a few. It says, like, for example, one study in 2003, yada, yada, yada. And I can say, okay, can you give me the citation for that 2003 study? And then boom, Rosh, Whalen, McClerney, McCallum, Lasco, Pittman, 2003 exaggerated amygdala response to masked facial stimuli and post-traumatic stress disorder, MRI study. And it gives me the whole citation for that. So that's pretty amazing, right? You don't have to just say, okay, I believe you, ChatGPT. You can say, I don't know. Tell me what research you're drawing upon. Now, of course, it's obviously good practice to go and verify the primary literature if you have access to it. But this is already, way more than most people are doing when it comes to just kind of basic research through Google. I also used it the other day in a therapy session, in terms of research assistance. I was talking with somebody who just had a baby, and I was like, hold on a sec, let me look something up. And I looked up, what is the prevalence rate for postpartum anxiety in people that have had existing anxiety disorders versus people who did not. And that helped me recognize, with that person that it's very common to have postpartum anxiety. And if you previously had an anxiety disorder, it's very, very common. Right? So even on the fly in that moment, it was a great tool for doing that. Again, a lot of this information you can get from doing a lot of Googling, reading articles, etc. But this really speeds up the process and it makes it more collaborative, which is something that I really, really enjoy. All right, so next I'm going to jump into talking about how I use this to help me with my report writing. But before that, I want to take a quick break and mention our sponsor for this episode. Today we are sponsored by BetterHelp. I think that a lot of us can fall into the trap of thinking very much about how we can be helpful and supportive to others, but sometimes we don't focus too much on ourselves, especially if you're in a situation like mine where you're in a helping profession, you have family members and partners to consider. It's very easy to let yourself get caught up in the shuffle. So instead of letting ourselves become stretched thin and burned out, therapy can help us find the tools to find more balance in our lives and keep supporting others while also not getting left behind. So if you're interested in trying out therapy, think about giving BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you do is fill out a brief questionnaire, and that'll get you matched with a licensed therapist. And if you need to switch therapists at any time for any reason, you can do so at no additional charge. So find more balance with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/duff today and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/duff for 10% off your first month. Okay, so returning to the topic here, report writing. So I'm a neuropsychologist, which means that I do a lot of testing. So I spend, at least 3 days a week, if not 4, with people testing their cognitive abilities, meaning their thinking abilities. And then I have to write up a comprehensive report interpreting all that information. And this has been, ChatGPT has been an amazing tool for that. I use it during many, many report writing sessions now. One thing that I can do there, and you may find some parallels for yourself, I can take all of a patient's medications. I can copy and paste the entire list, throw it into ChatGPT and say, can you tell me the generic name, brand name, mechanism of action, and any cognitive side effects that these medications might have? Please also comment on any interactions with other medications on the list. And that'll spit out just a bulleted list for me or a table with all that information. All of that I could find before, but it would be looking through books or Googling and finding each one individually. And this is just a really quick and amazing way to get all that information at a moment's notice. Another thing that it can do is it can summarize or restate medical information for you. So for instance, if there is a imaging report like an MRI report or some other diagnostic report that I'm not as familiar with, sometimes doctors will send over maybe a CT angiogram that I don't have as much familiarity with, or some labs that I don't really understand. I can paste that in and ask it to explain it to me. So for instance, I actually copied this from an MRI report, and I'll read the kind of medical text, and then we'll try it out in ChatGPT. I haven't done this one yet, but we'll see how it rephrases it. So let's see here. The pasted thing that I put in here from an MRI report says cerebral volume is normal for age. No acute infarct or acute cranial hemorrhage. No mass effect or midline shift. The obstructive fluid collection. Actually, I think there was a error there. Anyway, no edema within the brain parenchyma. There's bilateral paraventricular and subcortical white matter, TI/flare signal hyperintensity, nonspecific, but likely secondary to chronic small vessel ischemic change. The hippocampal formations are symmetric in size, morphology, and signal intensity. So obviously, this is a mouthful and a lot of kind of medicalese, right? So let me paste that into ChatGPT and ask it to summarize that in plain language. This is from an MRI of the brain. Please summarize in language that anyone could understand. And I'll paste it in. So certainly I can help with that. The MRI results show that the overall volume of the brain is normal for the person's age, and there's no sign of recent strokes or bleeding in the brain. There's also no swelling or inflammation in the brain tissue itself. However, there's some white matter hyperintensity detected in the paraventricular and subcortical regions of the brain, which may be caused by small vessel chronic disease. So what I can do is I can be like push on it, right? So what does mild white matter hyperintensity mean? It means areas of increased brightness on a magnetic resonance image, MRI scan, that indicate a change in the normal appearance of the white matter. And then it explains what white matter is. It explains what mild means in this case, and it explains what the significance of that is. So like, fucking amazing, right? Like that is, I feel like I wish that I had this earlier on in my career, because like I do know what that whole MRI report means, but this would have been such a quick way to get that information and learn really quickly, rather than a lot of trial and error. So yeah, it's an amazing thing. And you could do the same thing for yourself, right? Sometimes doctors aren't very good at, explaining what results mean. They just give you a report and they say, yeah, it looked okay. And then you read it and you're like, I don't know. What do all these words mean? So you could paste it in there and ask it for feedback. It can also help to figure out, for me, how to phrase things, right? So when I'm working on a neuropsych report, I might let it know, hey, I'm working on this neuropsychological report. I need to make sure this is, clear but professional language. So how can I write that somebody was acting rude like a teenager, even though they're an adult? I don't want to be offensive. And then I'll come up with some ideas for me to sort of, talk about their disinhibition or maybe lack of regard for social graces or something like that. So I can write it in a way that doesn't sound rude. And then when it comes to making conclusions and, determining possible conditions, which I have to do at the end, sort of why are these issues happening? Does it mean they have Alzheimer's disease? Is it normal aging? Is it a stroke? What have you? It can also be helpful. I'm obviously the one in the driver's seat here making the clinical interpretation and conclusions, but it's a good way to make sure that I'm not missing anything. I can literally tell it, what the symptoms are, what my conclusions are, and ask if there's anything I might be missing or other possible contributing factors. And then from there, if it comes up with something, I can go further. I can be like, like, for instance, if somebody has a history of cancer, and that's not something that I was considering as a possible cognitive factor, they might say, yeah, people who have undergone chemotherapy can sometimes have long-term cognitive effects. And then I would just ask it, oh, okay, well, what research says that? And then we'd go through that process again of getting deeper and deeper until I actually find articles. So yeah, it's, again, you can see how it's not changing the quality of my reports necessarily, but it is giving me much quicker access to the information that I need to fill in any gaps and to just make sure that I'm crossing all of my T's and dotting all of my I's. So, if you are in a field where you're doing a lot of writing, there might be some parallels that you could see as well. The next way that I have been using ChatGPT is with my kids. And this has been interesting. It's a lot of fun using this with my kids because it's just it's endless possibilities, right? The only limit is basically your creativity. And so I've done all sorts of stuff for my older kid. Actually, for both of them, I've had it generate work for them to do. And because it's on an AI program, it's been very engaging. And my oldest son, Remy, always wants to do math on here. So I'm like, okay. But ChatGPT has a pretty good understanding of grade levels. So I could tell it to generate a list of 30 sight words for my first grader, and it will do that. If they weren't good enough, I could say, make it a little bit harder and try again, and it will try it again. Same goes for math problems or reading passages. And the more time you spend refining and working with it, the more fun you can have. So for instance, I've had it make math word problems for my son with multiple choice answers. So he can actually sit here, read the question, look at the possibilities, and then press A, B, or C and answer the question. And then it will give him feedback on it. It's also great for generating stories that integrate, any elements that you would like. There was a time when, one of my kids woke up with a nightmare and I was like, okay, let's have a nightmare. Let's have a story to get you back to sleep. Tell me what you want the story to be about. And it was ridiculous. It was like, I want it to be about, a rainbow stars and, the Easter bunny. And there was like 5 other things. And because it's an AI program, it'll find a way to weave all those together. And it did. And it was very funny. And then they went back to sleep. One of my kids has days where he has to bring items to school with a given letter. So he has like a letter book where he has to draw a picture, write the letter, and then bring in an item that starts with that letter. Sometimes they're not so easy to think of things that he could bring in. So the other night I got an assist by asking it to come up with a list of 20 household items that begin with the letter U. And so we ended up bringing in a USB cord, and I wouldn't have thought of that otherwise, even though it literally starts with U, like the letter. So that's one other way. And really, the possibilities are endless. I think that we are probably going to make great use of ChatGPT over the summer. I've already thought of different things that we could do if we're, spending a lot of time, out of school, in the house. Maybe we can have it make us a scavenger hunt with riddles, or go on a walk and collect items to make a story with it, generate ideas or activities or lesson plans. Basically, I think you're probably going to run into a limitation with your imagination before you do with the actual functionality of the tool. So possibilities are endless. Okay, on to the next. I have also been using this for cooking. This is perhaps a silly one, but it's a really good tool to help with cooking and general food-related things. Now, the recipes aren't perfect. I've seen actually a few videos. Joshua Wiseman did one where he cooked against somebody doing basically he had his recipe, I think it was for burgers, and then he had somebody else doing it following ChatGPT's recipe. And even if it's not like exactly the best, it does a pretty darn good job. But if you're just trying to figure things out or get an idea, it's a great starting place. So if you want a specific recipe that you can do with ingredients on hand, you could do that, right? You can let it know what ingredients you have and ask it to come up with some options, or write out specific recipes. The cool thing is you can ask it to reconfigure in any way that you want. So like if you ask for a recipe for stir fry and you go, oh, I actually don't have chicken. Can you make this with beef? Or can we do something aside from noodles or whatever? It'll figure out a way to do that. If you want it to convert measurements, you can. So I've been doing a lot of baking, and if I see something in cups, I might go, okay, can we convert that to grams? And it will do that. I was making, I don't know, was it when I was making pretzels or something like that? I was like, okay, convert this to grams. Done. All right. I only want to make half of that recipe. Boom. Gives me the output for half of the recipe. Only takes a second. So again, really powerful in terms of its computational abilities. You can have it help you make a meal plan. If you're trying to adjust your weight by losing weight or gaining weight, what have you, you can let it know sort of what you've eaten, what your goals are, any information that it needs, and then allow it to advise you about what you might do for the rest of your meals and snacks for the day. There was a funny story the other day. I was baking and I don't know, it was Friday. I'm not sure if I don't think I was like really tipsy at that point. I think I was just not paying a lot of attention and I fucked up my dough. I was trying to make like a nice, boule, like a round loaf of bread that I've done plenty of, but I messed it up. It was overhydrated, meaning it was too wet, and it was like just this like slop on the cutting board, and I couldn't salvage it. I tried adding more flour. I tried different things, and so I asked ChatGPT to help, and it gave me some ideas, and one of them was trying to convert it instead of just like a regular loaf into ciabatta bread. And I'm like, okay, how would I do that? It's like, well, you take your overhydrated dough. This is what you add to it. This is what you do from here. And if you follow me on Instagram, recently, my wife posted a picture of like a really nice charcuterie board that I made. And that was the bread that was on there. So it ended up working out. Thanks, ChatGPT. A few other ways. I know there's a lot here, but as I said, like this has changed fundamentally a lot of the ways that I do things, and there's so much you can do with it. Prioritizing and planning. I don't use this one a ton because generally I'm pretty good at doing this myself, but there have been a few times that I've used it to help me prioritize and plan things. I remember not long ago, there was an instance where I was about to leave to go out of town, and I had a variety of tasks to do. Basically, my wife and the boys left first, and then I had a couple hours before I had to leave. And so in that time, I'm like, okay, I have the house to myself. I have, these 5 tasks that I need to do. I have 2 hours to do it in. So I told all of that to ChatGPT and was like, help me prioritize these tasks. And so it did so based on importance, effort, how much time they would probably take. And it gave me a timeline for all of that. And I was like, okay, cool, let's follow it. And it all worked out. And I could see a lot of ways to use this. If you're the type of person to get decision paralysis and know that there are a variety of things you need to do, but you don't really know which you should do or where to get started, you can kind of plug that in there and just let the AI tell you what to do. So yeah, it's a good option for that. I think that it also makes a great partner for brainstorming or just exploration of ideas. I had a situation recently where there was just a lot of confluence happening of the things that I was experiencing and sort of listening to. I was driving to work and I was listening to a podcast where it was a Tim Ferriss podcast, I believe. And it was a neuroscientist talking about a very specific topic, which is the use of psychedelics. So like psilocybin or MDMA, et cetera, to open up critical periods in development. Critical period is basically a period of time during your development where you are most primed to learn something. So for example, as humans, we have a certain language critical period. We have a certain vision critical period, and we learn these skills during those periods, and we can't really learn them quite as well afterward. And so she mentioned that, psychedelics are one way that they're researching to reopen critical periods, but another way to do that is through deprivation. So deprivation of whatever sense or skill that might be. And then right after I listened to that, I had a therapy patient of mine go on a silent meditation retreat for like 3 days where they were basically deprived of not only speech, but social interaction. And the way that they were talking about how things felt once they were allowed to speak again, that made me like really think about that podcast I was listening to. So I thought maybe there could be a connection. So all I did was go into ChatGPT and I was like, hey, do you know of any connection between the developmental concept of critical periods and isolation such as silent meditation retreats? And from there, we kind of went on a little bit of a journey together. It was like, well, I could think of a few connections such as this and this and this. And then from there, I was able to learn more about some of the studies they've done on mice that look at reopening critical periods of development. And then, I went down further rabbit hole. I said, okay, can you summarize some of those studies? And when it summarized the studies, it talked about increasing neuroplasticity, which is the amount of synapses or spaces between neurons in your brain. And I'm like, oh, how do you even measure that? How does one measure synapses of the brain? And then it went on that and told me how people do that. So it was like, wow, I learned a whole shit ton of information in like a 20-minute session, which is pretty great. And then especially if you're in a position like mine where I already have some existing expertise in this subject, it's just like cranking that up, right, to 11. So it's a great way to sort of explore random ideas and follow hunches that you might have. A few more ways to get through that I like using it, and then I'll get into the mental health stuff. I hope that you're still with me, and I hope that this is interesting to you. Again, this is just stuff to sort of jog, your ideas and see if there's anything that you might be able to apply to your own life, as well as just, sharing my excitement about it, because these are very, very powerful tools. It's also very good for converting information. I use it a lot to transform information, and specifically for the podcast. I'm using it constantly for the podcast now. So for each episode, I write a detailed outline in my notes app, which is Evernote, just a bunch of bullet points. And I'm looking at it right now as I'm talking to you. And then afterward, when I'm, getting ready to publish the podcast, now I've been asking ChatGPT to take those bullet points and convert it to paragraph format, so that it reads much more like a transcript, and I could put that into the blog post for the episode. Likewise, I can have it take pieces of information and write a blog post for me. And the blog post can definitely require a little more kind of direction and finagling to get the right tone and length, etc. But it serves as a great starting point, and you can always go back and forth until you find something that works pretty well by making your own adjustments. Most of these tools like ChatGPT, they can create tables like I mentioned. They can also make code, so you can have it write code for you like HTML or CSS or JavaScript or Python or any number of things. So, if you ask it some questions and tell it to compile the information, it can do that in so many different ways. There's probably ways that I'm not even sure about yet. It's also really good at summarizing. I mentioned it a bit already about research, but ChatGPT is really good at summarizing information. You can direct it to a web page and say, you could paste in a link and say, can you summarize or pull out the key points from this page here? Or you can paste in information into the box. For certain commonly accessible things like plots of books or movies, it can also just tell you about it. You can say, hey, can you tell me about XYZ movie? And you don't have to give it a link or anything like that. Like the other day, I was writing something and I said it's kind of a catch-22, which is a common term to mean something that's kind of a no-win situation. And I was like, wait, I know that there's a book called Catch-22, but I don't actually know the context of where that term, kind of came from. So I asked it about it. I'm like, hey, where did the term Catch-22 come from? And it told me, yeah, it's from the book. And I said, okay, well, where in the book? Well, it's in this scene where this happens. And then when I pushed it more, it actually provided some quotes. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's what happened. So yeah, it can really, really help with accessing and summarizing information quickly. If you are somebody who is a content creator, ChatGPT is an obvious tool to help you out. It can help with generating ideas for content or the content itself. I have been using it to help me develop carousel posts on Instagram, the ones where you swipe through and there's 5 to 8 different slides. I usually don't copy what it actually creates, but it helps to give me a framework that I use to make my own, right? So I'm like, how can we make a carousel post about this? And then it gives me an idea. That's sort of like the AI version of what would be good. And I take that and I go, okay, I'm going to write my own stuff, but thank you for giving me a starting place. But if you were somebody who owns a, mom and pop shop in town and you're just looking to have a better online presence, you don't even have to do that much work. You could totally just spit out whatever ChatGPT gives you, have it guide you through the process, and you have all this ready-made content, which would totally be, functional for a lot of people. It can also write captions. I've had it compile a list of influencers. This is a little bit better with Bard because it's, actively connected to the internet. But for instance, I've had it go, okay, can you generate a list of 30 influencers on Instagram with under 1 million followers that talk about having bipolar disorder? Boom. There's a bunch of people for me to reach out to about my book. You could have it talk to you about social media strategy. and all sorts of stuff, right? So as long as you tell it what functionality to play, it'll try to play along. So you could say, this is my company, this is what I'm all about, these are my target people, please act as my social media manager, and, let's bounce some ideas off each other. And that would work totally fine. The last thing that I'll mention about my own favorite uses for ChatGPT is that it makes a really good platform to have fun and play games. And since it's an AI, the options are really almost limitless. Obviously, at the moment, right now, it's not currently generating video or visuals. We're just talking about text, though that probably will change in the future. You can't have it, make a full graphic experience for you, but you can totally have it run you through text-based games. I tried it out. I was like, what can we do? What kind of games can we play? And so it said, well, we can try some text-based games. And I said, okay, run me through a scenario. And it's like, well, tell me what sort of scenario you would like. And I said, okay, how about a scenario about being on a space station that was abandoned? And then from there, it totally just ran with it. It was like, okay, you're on a space station. There's a few different things you could check out. It looks like it's been abandoned, but there were signs of life here recently. There's a lab that has a containment breach, and so it's sealed off. The communications array isn't working. Power is at this percentage, whatever. What would you like to do next? And so it just led me through that. And I give it inputs and then it responds. I've also played around with making it do more standardized rule sets. So similar to like Dungeons and Dragons, where it uses a numerical value, like a dice roll. And it actually said like a 1d5, like it'll tell me what dice it's rolling to determine combat. And then you can have, characters with statistics, items that you have in your inventory, potions, etc. So it'll totally run you through like a fully realized scenario. The more you give it, the more you get back. The fun thing about it as well is it's not very rigid. So like, for instance, in that space station scenario, as I played with it for a few minutes, there was an alien life form that escaped from the lab. It broke through its containment, and I was trying to capture it. And it said that, as I was looking through the notes, I found out that it was attracted to heat. And one of the options that it didn't give me, but I just decided to wing it. I was like, okay, are there any chemicals in this lab that could be used to create an exothermic reaction? And so it's like, you look around and then find these chemicals. And so it took what I was thinking and then it totally integrated it into the story. So, I ended up setting up a chemical reaction in the air vent that lured it out. And then, we were able to get it contained again. So yeah, it's really, really creative. Aside from like that kind of lofty stuff, you can also have it generate trivia questions for you. I'm sure it could play like blackjack or dice games. Let me see. I'm going to check if it will play blackjack. We play blackjack. Oh, I got to reload here. I'm sure it will though. Let's see. Can we play blackjack? Let's play a simulated game. Tell me which cards I am dealt. Ace of spades, 4 of diamonds. Yeah, so it's simulating a game of blackjack. At first it said no. It's like, I don't have the capability to play games like blackjack directly. And I said, well, let's play a simulated game. Tell me which cards I'm dealt. It said ace of spades and 4 of diamonds. I'm going to say hit. Okay, you've chosen to hit. Next card, 6 of clubs. You have a total of 11 points. Hit. Next card is 10 of hearts, 21. Hey, blackjack, what's up? So, the more you give it, the better it will do. So I'm sure that I could keep working with it and say, okay, let's have me start with a certain pool of money. I'd like to make bets before every round, et cetera, and it will, do what you want it to do. Obviously, in this case, it might be easier to just go and play blackjack online or something, but it's really cool that you can make this be whatever you want it to be and have fun with it. So before I talk about the mental health applications, let's talk about just, a couple limitations to ChatGPT. One is, again, I mentioned before, but a static data set. So the data set I think that it was trained on was made in 2021. So it doesn't have access to current events or things that have developed since then. And it will let you know if it can't answer something, it'll say, hey, I only have access to information from this period of time, etc. And then, of course, there are other models like Bard that have that internet access, so it's not really an issue. There are also character limits. So there are character limits for input, for how much you're allowed to paste in. And there are also character limits for how much it could give you back, right? So if you're asking it for a response and it's going to be longer than it can provide, it can be a little bit annoying, but I found good ways to work around it. So for instance, if it's outputting a large amount of text and it trails off, you can just copy it and say, please continue from the paragraph starting with this sentence, and then it'll pick up from there and keep going. And then likewise, you can say, I'm going to paste, 3 things in here. Please don't respond to them yet. When I'm done, I will ask you to do something with them. So you can work with it, but it is kind of a minor annoyance. It also, can sometimes give suggestions that are just not true. So for example, it might say that it can do something that it actually can't, such as maintaining a daily journal or giving you reminders. And as long as that's something that you're aware of, as long as you know that its functionality is somewhat limited, you could usually call it out. So like you can be like, hey, are you sure you can do that? And it'll say, that's my mistake. You're right. I can't do that. So, sometimes it's imperfect, but you have to just be aware of that and try to have your wits about you while using it. All right. So let's talk about a few ways that I think ChatGPT could help you with your mental health. Some of these were actually thought of with the help of ChatGPT. I was like, hey, how can we use you as a tool for mental health? Some of them were good example or suggestions. Some of them were not good suggestions. So this is an example of working collaboratively with the AI. But here's some really awesome ideas. So 1, journaling. You could use ChatGPT as a platform to journal. One thing that it can do is give you prompts. So you could say, hey, can you give me a journal prompt to work through? It will do that for you. You could also continuously come back to the same chat whenever you want to journal. As I mentioned before, it saves the sessions. It saves each chat. So you could go back to it and you can kind of specify one particular chat as your journaling chat. And with that latter strategy, if you come back to it, you could ask it questions about your journal entries. So say you journaled for, 5 days or so, you could come back and ask it questions like, do you see any consistent themes in my journal entries above? Or are there any common words that I tend to use? Or go back to a specific instance and say, hey, in this example or in this instance that I wrote about, could you see another way of interpreting it? Whatever. So it could give you that feedback. And I think that's pretty interesting, really. It's applying the computational power of AI to just the text that you're putting in. And I don't know. It's a fascinating possibility. It's also good for things like mindfulness and meditation. It can help you to teach you breathing exercises or techniques for mindfulness. I think it's also an amazing resource for creating custom guided meditation scripts. So let's say that you have this personal favorite location that's very cozy to you and it feels good, and you want to develop a meditation based on that. You can say something like, could you generate a guided meditation script that would take about 10 minutes to get through? I'd like it to be on the setting of a farm on a beautiful day with my horses. You can even name your horses or, talk about what they look like. Please guide me through breathing and muscle relaxation while tying it into the setting and narrative. And if you put all that in there, it'll do its best to write out a script for you. And then again, you could always push back if you don't like the output. You could say, okay, I need this to be a bit longer, or let's focus more on this and less on that, etc. If you want it to be really wild, what you can do is you can find a good script that it makes. Then you can copy and paste that into something like 11 Labs or Murph, which are both AI voice generators. And then you can save it and it will just speak it out loud to you so you can follow along instead of reading it. Pretty crazy. Goal planning is also a great thing it can do, help you set goals. It's pretty self-explanatory, but the more info you give it, the better it will do. It can help you prioritize, set goals, plan for things, etc. My wife was, when I was explaining this to her, she was saying, man, I wish I could have used this when I was planning weddings. I wish I could be like, hey, there's this many people that are going to be at this event. We want to make sure that they have, X, Y, Z drinks. How much should we buy, etc. Tons of applications there. But for mental health, you could also have it help you with CBT, cognitive behavioral techniques. Obviously, it's not a therapist, but you could ask it to help you identify negative thoughts, right? So you could, in the journaling example, say, can you help me identify negative thoughts or cognitive distortions in what I wrote above? You could ask it to provide alternative explanations for assumptions that you're making. I have tried using it as a virtual support group because that was one of the suggestions that it pumped out was we can do a virtual support group. And that's been hit or miss. It takes a little bit of finagling, but eventually I was able to get it to work pretty well. So things that I had to do was, include me as a member of the group and ask for my input. So it would generate a scenario and I'd say, welcome to the support group. Let's hear from our members here. Other members would introduce themselves. Then it would say, now how about you? And I would say, hi, my name's Robert. I want to talk a bit today about my family issues, whatever. And, it's not going to replace a real support group or a therapist, but you could certainly use it to provide different frames for self-examination. It's sort of a different platform for journaling with a little bit more guidance and maybe some ideas you didn't think of. You could frame it as a support group or talking with a supportive family member, anything like that. And that might help to draw out ideas that you didn't already have. I can also see applications for inner child work. You could describe yourself now and yourself back as a child, and then have a guided conversation with yourself where you're, kind of reflecting and having a back and forth conversation with your inner child. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit different than if you were just writing it all yourself because it's coming from your brain versus, talking with an AI. But, it could be pretty interesting, I think. One of ChatGPT's main strengths is in education. So if you're looking to learn more about a given mental health issue, it's a great resource for doing that. If you're not already pretty familiar with the information, I would advise cross-referencing because, you never know if you're going to get a little bit of a dud, but it's still an amazing tool for that purpose. As well, if you're trying to make changes in your life, like applying to a school or a job, you can use that. I've already used it for other people. I've tried to help out by, feeding it information like a job description and a person and having it act as a hiring manager. And if you do that, you can go through an entire mock interview and you could say, I'm applying to a job. This is the job description. This is my experience level. I'm trying to apply for this position. Could you please act as a hiring manager to run me through a mock interview? And it will totally do that. Same, you can do that with resumes, cover letters. You can say, here's my resume. Do you have any tips about formatting it or changing anything? You could say, could you please generate a cover letter for me? Like for instance, you could say, please generate a cover letter for this job that I have described above. I've been out of the workforce for a while, but I want to stress that I'm still aware of current trends and very eager to get back into it. And it will do its best to write out a cover letter for you. And in that case, I would, use that as a starting point, adjust whatever you need to, but what a great resource, right? The last thing, I'll talk about a couple more advanced ideas. ChatGPT is amazing, as is Bard, because it can also provide code. It can code for you. And so you could use things to scratch your own itch, websites, apps, extensions, whatever that support your specific needs in life. I made 2 of them yesterday. I've never, I guess not never, like way back in the day when I was in high school, I had a couple like basic coding classes, but I don't remember shit from them. But I have essentially no coding experience. And yesterday I made both a Chrome extension and like an HTML web app just from, going back and forth with ChatGPT. So I made a Chrome extension that shows how long I've been on a given website, right? So if I flip over to, if I flip over to the current iteration of ChatGPT that I have up, it tells me in the top right-hand corner how long I've spent on it. And since I refreshed the page a little while ago, it started over the timer, but it's been 10 minutes since then. So it has a running timer in the top right that I can move around. And I created all that by just telling it what to do. I said, can you help me generate a Chrome extension that does this? And then as it worked on it, we ran into some bugs and things. And I said, okay, I'm getting this error. How would you resolve that? And it just led me through the process step by step. And then another thing that I generated was a simple HTML web app that helps to determine somebody's age based on their date of birth and when they were tested, because I often have to do that. And there's a certain tool that I often Google and it's kind of shitty. So I made a better one. Again, in just like 10 minutes there. So, you can make things to scratch your own itch. I think that it could also be a really interesting platform for like imagined exposure. When you're doing exposure work and anxiety, especially for like phobias, you work through a hierarchy, and often at the bottom of that hierarchy is imagining scenarios and often creating scripts to walk through a scenario where you are approaching the thing that you fear or have anxiety toward. So I could see, collaborating with ChatGPT to make an exposure hierarchy and then using it to help you develop scripts for that imagined exposure. You could even, take it a bit farther and, ask it to develop prompts that you could enter into something like Midjourney, which is an AI art program, to develop images that you can use for exposure work, right? Like, I want to generate a picture of a spider crawling on somebody's arm, but I want it to be cartoony and unrealistic, right? So it's something that you could look at, but not be quite as triggered by. And then you can be very, very specific too, right? So if you have trauma related to something very specific, a location, a type of person, a type of animal, whatever, you could, generate that from your own efforts by, working along with these AI platforms. The last thing that I'll say is I'm gonna work on this, but I want to try seeing if I could turn it into a good therapist. It's not going to be a replacement, obviously, but I wonder if I feed it enough information and give it enough feedback, if I could turn it into a good supportive friend or kind of virtual therapist. And that's obviously going to have to exist within one specific chat because it'll go away between sessions. But I want to kind of spend an hour on it soon and see, what can I get it to do? Can I get it to recognize, things that I would recognize in therapy? Can I get it to reflect in the way that I would, and et cetera? So those are kind of some more in the future advanced ideas, but hopefully this is something that has got you thinking about how you might apply these tools to your own life. I think there are a lot of fears and confusion about AI right now, which are valid. We don't know exactly where this is going to go, and the pace of it is alarming, but it's here, and the technology is not going anywhere. And I think there are many ways to leverage it to make your life better. I think that to avoid entirely using AI tools right now would be like refusing to use touchscreens when tablets came out, right? Like using computers instead because you don't want to use touchscreens, or refusing to switch from BlackBerry to iPhone because you want the tactile keyboard or whatever. At some point you're just going to be left behind. And so I hope this helps you see some practical ways that you can use this powerful technology to make your life better. It's not going to take away anything that you're doing, but it is going to amplify it and, quicken the pace with which you're able to do things, which maybe will free up more time for you to just be a person and enjoy your life. Who knows? But hopefully these are good thoughts for you. Please let me know if you have found any interesting applications that I didn't mention here. Feel free to email me or find me on social media. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and end the episode. So this has been episode 348 of the Hardcore Self-Help Podcast. If you want the show notes, go to duffthepsych.com/episode 348. And if you want to send me any comments or questions for future episode, send me an email to duffthepsych@gmail.com. All right, take care of yourselves. I'll see you for the next one. Bye.